Next year, the World Wide Web will turn 30 years old. Since that time, the norms have been established. Google is the most visited site on the internet, with 40,000 search queries per second and over 1.2 trillion queries a year, followed closely by Facebook for instant messaging and YouTube for entertainment. But when searching the World Wide Web, you are, in fact, only scanning a small portion of the vast, immeasurable expanse of pages, media and content that make up the web as a whole. This is because you are searching the surfaced web, the indexed web. What lies beyond that is mostly tame information, but at its darkest, deepest layer, it is hiding a very grim secret. In the 1990s, computer scientists at the US Navy developed a new kind of layered technology to browse the web with anonymity that couldn't be traced with standard procedures. But in developing this, they inadvertently created a space for some of the worst and largest scale organised crime in the history of the human race. The internet is one of mankind's greatest inventions, but this innovation turned that into a curse. This collective space is known as the dark web. But what is it and how does it work? These days there's a lot of misinformation and hype surrounding this dark face of the web, but there is some truth behind all manner of the dark and horrific rumours. Anything goes off the beaten track of the surface web, and today we'll be diving into the abyss and uncovering the mysteries that lie on the infamous dark web. Nowadays, the terms internet and web are extremely interchangeable and colloquially mean generally the same thing. However, they are not actually the same thing. The internet is a means of communication, a network of networks, and an ever-growing method of connectivity that was invented by the US Army for a bulletin board and started to be pieced together in 1981. The World Wide Web is an application of the internet created in 1989 by Tim Berners-Lee, and on this application, content, media and information are stored via websites and pages, which are made available to anyone through internet connectivity. When using the web, you will commonly be using a few main websites: Google for searching, YouTube for entertainment and media, Twitter and Facebook, and maybe a few others such as Reddit. The one sure way to find all of these sites is to Google them, using Google's own search engine or any other search engine. These search engines index websites and order them in the most relevant fashion based on the nature of your query and return millions of results in seconds. With so much searchable content, it's easy to think that this is all there is, but that simply isn't the case. In fact, the billions of results Google and the other search engines index may actually account for a staggeringly minuscule 1% or less of the web's entire content. The common metaphor is to compare the web to an iceberg, and the index part of the web, also known as the surface web, is the tip, with a vast expanse beneath. The totality of non-indexed websites, domains and everything you can't search for is known as the deep web. People often confuse the deep web and the dark web, and it can lead you to the conclusion that the dark web accounts for over 99% of the internet. But this isn't true, far from it in fact. But 99% and above of a web whose tiny percentage of indexed content spans billions of pages is a lot. Something fairly substantial must be to blame. Well, as it happens, the majority of this content is things like hidden company databases, private servers, anything that requires user accounts and authentication to view. Most businesses store terabytes of information in the form of securely stored databases. These can be accessed through browsers or a network, so constitute part of the World Wide Web, but you cannot search for them and find them via search engines, so they are classified as being on the deep web. However, while much of this 99% is company data, that doesn't account for all of it. In comparison to the surface web and the deep web, what we're about to discuss is a tiny slither, a lining at the bottom level of the internet, but that isn't to take away from the severity of what you can find on there. It's something that we know very little about and is intangible and almost impossible to deal with. This portion is known as the dark web. Ever since the internet's popularization and the protocols that were established with it, privacy has been something that has been very easily discarded when using the web. Basically anything can be traced back to the sender or users and routed, and this is just due to the nature of internet connectivity and the hierarchy of access. But in the mid-1990s, however, a subset of the US government decided to try and tackle this privacy issue. This subset was the Naval Research Laboratory, or NRL. The US government would definitely have a vetted interest in anonymous internet usage, and so it was that Paul Siverson, Michael Reed and David Goldschlag created an anonymous method of browsing known as onion routing thereafter. Onion routing is named as such due to the extra layer it adds to using the web. With it, anonymity is achieved by going beyond conventional methods of internet communication and bypassing a midpoint where senders and receivers can be traced. This peer-to-peer method of communication creates what is known as an overlay network. Originally, this overlay network the NRL had created was just a means of browsing the web anonymously, but it provided a space for other web pages and an entirely secluded private section of the web to be created. This space for browsing and communication, technically within the deep web, came to be known as a darknet. The NRL's project that had come to evolve into the Tor browser we know today is one of a number of darknets, together making up the infamous dark web. And this subset of the deep web is where all the shady, publicised and illicit margin of things we cannot account for on the deep web occurs. Initially, the public wasn't meant to gain access to the dark web, but as many critics pointed out, there is no point in having anonymous communication if you're the only one using it, as vendors can look at traffic to their sites and immediately know when government agencies have visited due to the unsolicited nature of the visit. In order to be truly anonymous, security would have to be achieved through obscurity, and so on the 20th of September 2002, the Tor project was released to the public for the first time. Before long, this would allow government users to blend in via the increasing number of people anonymously browsing, and a decade later, Tor's usage has exploded. For the most part, Tor is used by millions of people for its original purpose, anonymity online. People use it to browse the surface web without fear of online surveillance. Estimates show that around 97% of users fall into this bracket. However, the last 3% are using Tor for a more shady purpose, browsing the Tor darknet, arguably the most fruitful and major component of the dark web. With the space of the overlay network, specialized .onion websites can be created, which can only be accessed through Tor itself. For most of these .onion websites, you need specific links, as they appear as a string of random characters in the URL unless they are very popular sites, such as Silk Road. According to a Tor discussion on the Stack Exchange, there could be as many as 30,000 .onion websites out there, but only around 7,000 are public, although these figures are now 2 years old. Nowadays, accessing the Tor network is easy. Simply go to their website, install the browser, and you're finished. Of course, Tor isn't the only overlay network either. There are plenty of peer-to-peer networks with their own darknets. However, these conform to much more of the textbook definition of an overlay network, as opposed to an established criminal underground like Tor has come to be associated with. For example, Anonet is a friend-to-friend network using VPNs, which creates a similar overlay network. Freenet is a popular darknet that is centered around free speech and privacy and is monitored by the creators. ZeroNet is a peer-to-peer computer network whose experience feels similar to that of browsing a darknet. I2P is a popular tool with its own darknet filled with EAP sites, its own versions of .onion web pages. Dribbler is another file-sharing network that can be used as a darknet, and there are dozens more beyond that. All of these are subsets of the totality that make up the dark web, but not all of them are laced with crime. Just as the deep web is mostly tame content such as business information, not all of the dark web content is inherently shady either. Some of it is just secure file sharing among other things and is highly intangible. Before continuing, just know that I am not inciting the use of the dark web in any way here. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and even a few clicks on the dark web could land you in legal trouble or maybe even danger depending on your misfortune. Many of the types of websites we will shortly discuss can easily be masquerading as other types of sites, and there are numerous instances of child porn websites being disguised as links to less harmful, more intriguing sites on the dark web. Some even believe that Edward Snowden's WikiLeaks reveal proved that anybody downloading Tor using a manual browser is automatically put on an NSA watch list, although details on this are sketchy and redundant now. In the most basic terms, there are a lot of risks associated with using the dark web, as some go further than that. There are any number of horror stories out there about people having their addresses revealed, their webcams hacked, and a load of other unfortunate circumstances being forced upon them on account of not being careful enough when browsing this beast. Yes, most of the sites are fake, or grossly exaggerated to appeal to the dark web hype, but a handful are true. But criminal catching and a political presence on this front has been increasing, especially during the Trump administration. So, if it doesn't end up with the bad guys after you, one wrong click may end up with the good guys doing the same thing. Generally, if you want to use the dark web, then make sure you know the dark web. Read up on safeguarding yourself and protect your computer correctly. Cover your webcam and be vigilant at all times. By now, if you're new to the dark web, you're probably wondering why I'm being so overly cautious. What are we hiding from? Well, that's the looming question that remains. What specifically resides on the Tor darknet to warrant this kind of reasonable paranoia? Well, let's find out. The majority of pages that make the dark web so horribly fascinating are Tor's very own hidden services. Given the 7,000.onion pages figure is probably slightly outdated now, we don't really know how many public Tor pages there are. Neither do we know how many of those fall under the classification of hidden services, and similarly we do not know how many of them are illegal. Generally, very rough surveys estimate that some way under half of surveyed hidden services are illegal by some means or another. But what makes a hidden service? Well, it's generally a .onion website with something to offer that you couldn't usually purchase on the surface web. This usually translates to criminal services, but not always. One thing the dark web has, completely legally, is an enormous presence of furries who value their privacy in communal spaces, among other communities and groups. However, what has captured the eye of the public for roughly 5 or so years now are the illegal hidden services, the drugs, the weapons, the human trafficking, the hitmen, and all the other gruesome stuff lurking somewhere on the dark web. Most of these hidden services are known to be scams, and the currency in which you would trade the authentic ones in is invariably Bitcoin. Any number of shady activities you can think of will be happening in some form or another on the dark web, but the main prevalent industries fall into a few main categories. The biggest industry and the most financially rewarding is without a doubt drugs. Illegal drug sales account for billions of dollars of dark web profitability. It has completely revolutionised the drug trade in the UK and US, with better quality and more varied drugs now widely and readily available, increasing the scope of the problem for authorities intangibly. Nowadays, anybody can order in bulk from the dark web and locally sell their acquisitions for a profit. The big marketplaces are as user-friendly as Amazon, with effective rating systems for vendors and ways to quickly identify scam sellers. Drugs are delivered discreetly and usually with good customer service. The game has changed from what was once a gang-driven and dangerous industry to a near enough an oligopoly of vendors running the show from different countries. Of all the markets to spring up, the biggest was by far Silk Road Forum, and this was the website to bring the dark web as a whole into the public eye. First launched by Ross William Ulbricht in February 2011, it was a headache for the FBI for 6 years. By July 2013, a little over 2 years since its launch, it had generated over $1.2 billion in revenue. It was seized multiple times by the FBI but kept running and springing up on new .onion links, before an ironic eventual lack of funding caused the operation to be starved of cash and go offline in 2017. When arrested and sentenced to life in prison, the FBI claimed that Ulbricht had attempted to have 6 people assassinated, which leads us on to the next big dark web industry. Hitmen for hire is another enormous industry on the dark web, but it is much more hit and miss, pardon the pun. It is one of the most glamorous industries on the dark web and is very easy to make video content on this kind of thing, and hence there is a lot of exaggerated detail around using the dark web for contracted killings, but it does happen. It doesn't take a genius to work out that anonymous peer-to-peer hiring would provide a perfect network for hired killers to operate a financially lucrative network of contracts in secret, but the field is incredibly trust-based and hence is open to so much fraud. That being said, this is one of the many industries bigger in Asia and Latin America where political corruption and politically motivated murders are generally more common. Next we come on to what is probably the biggest moral problem on the dark web: child exploitation networks. In recent years, the FBI have had more success in tackling this than the drug industries, to be sure, but it's still a massive problem. The dark web is once again a perfect anonymous medium to trade this disgusting material. The process is not particularly complex either. You can sign up to an anonymous .onion website and view this obscene material the same way any other porn site would allow you to. In some cases, sites even have top featuring children and the number of videos they've appeared in and their community ratings. It makes you sick to the stomach to think about. Some sites have even been known to have in excess of 200,000 members and hundreds of gigabytes of footage and pictures of children. Several of the big hitting websites have been seized over the past couple of years, and the list of captured members and vendors is in the thousands now, but it is nowhere near enough progress to tackle this enormous problem. Human trafficking is on the same sort of wavelength really as child exploitation, and it is a great reminder of the fact that if a market for it exists, it will be operating on the dark web. Again, however, this is an industry that has received a lot of exaggeration for the sake of sensationalist videos and documentaries, but that's not to say it doesn't happen. In poorer countries, specifically Ghana at the moment, the dark web is making their already bad human trafficking situation worse. Thorn, a charity designed for tackling human trafficking, found that over 60% of those they had rescued had been sold online, and most were on their way to gruesome sex slavery. Finally, something that is worth a mention is the infamous Mariana's Web, and this is where the line between exaggerated existence and internet urban legend is crossed. There are a lot of fantastical rumours about this region of the dark web. Given the name refers to the deepest known part of the oceans, Mariana's Web is seen as the bottom layer of secrecy and restriction on the dark web, but there's been a lot of misinformation about it over the years. In the very early days, it was seen as a fantastical archive of humanity's greatest kept secrets, such as the location of Atlantis. If this wasn't unbelievable enough, it was believed the only way to access it would be through quantum computers. In more recent years, it has had a bit of a sense check, and the urban legend now holds that it is the most gruesome and exclusive of the hidden services, offering the most vile, violent and repulsive content known to man, and only accessible by knowing the right high-ranking people. It seems some people liken it to a playground of New World Order type secret organisations, but that is the perfect indication of why this is most likely smoke and mirrors. Of course, there will be extremes. The content described as the worst of the worst still probably exists, but not in one central fantastical location like Mariana's Web is made out to be. What it does serve as is the epitome of how we have taken dark web rumours and exaggerated them incredibly far. There are dozens of other categories and sites out there. Red rooms, which are all mostly fake, Satanist websites, torture sites, terrorist funding pages, bestiality sites, you name it. If it's illegal and there's demand, it's likely happening in some form or another on the dark web. This is what makes it so fascinating and so beautifully twisted to so many people, and has caused it to become probably the most talked about internet mystery since the dawn of the innovation, and with good reason given the depth to this lowest part of the iceberg. With the implied humanitarian crises of human trafficking and child exploitation among the immense suffering a more prevalent South American drugs trade is causing, you have to wonder what is being done from the side of the government to tackle this. After all, the US created Tor, and in a sense the dark web. Shouldn't they be held accountable for its repercussions? Well, even the government has tried to act historically, and it's been grossly ineffective. Silk Road Forum was able to bounce back in days and even hours between its respected seizing, and mining .onion websites for owner information takes a long time, if even possible at all in many cases. With over 7,000 active .onion pages and upwards of 20,000 private ones, it's simply impractical to suggest that the FBI could tackle this alone. However, in the last 2 years, the Trump administration has been launching attacks on the dark web websites, mainly drug markets, spearheaded by Jeff Sessions and his extremely negative and somewhat out-of-place stance on cannabis usage. However, these attacks are just a drop in the ocean of a beast that has been unleashed. While the Trump administration do seem to be kicking into life over the matter, they are taking a capitalist approach. Net neutrality is a method they claim will help stem the flow of criminal activity by charging dramatically higher prices for Tor usage. It doesn't take a genius to work out that all this will do is punish the 97% of users using Tor for anonymity, whilst doing next to nothing for the major drug sites that operate primarily out of the repealed net neutrality territory. The problem remains that the US government will never explicitly shut Tor down or take drastic action, as they were the ones who created it and they need Tor for their anonymous activities, and hence all the horrific byproducts are seen as an acceptable cost, despite the suffering it causes. It's a sad state of affairs, made even sadder by just how commercial the approach to solving the problems the current government is taking is. It seems that the dark web is just too big to control now anyway, like a beast let off the leash. The government can launch attacks all at once, but the criminal underbelly will regenerate, grow and recover quickly. The only silver lining is that the dark web is a very small section of the deep web, incomparably small, and not the vast criminal conspiracy it is made out to be. But still, sadly, the dark web is here to stay, the big, beautiful, scary and terrifying dark side of one of mankind's greatest creations. It will go unparalleled and unrestricted for many more years to come, until a more severe yet caring and human approach is taken to tackle the worst things that go on there. I'll leave you with one final thought, and that is the strapline the original Tor project was released with when it was made available under its open source license in 2002, and that is the following. The Onion routing network is functional and deployed. It's not terribly diverse yet, but heck, it's just for show now. Diversity for the Onion routing network has almost definitely been achieved in every sense of the word some 16 years on, but who could have imagined the enormous human, social and political costs this diversity would have come at? Be wise, be safe, and above all be kind. And of course, thank you very much for watching.